Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first and foremost, Representative Overdorf, you know, we have spent an extensive amount of time talking about this over a couple days. And I think we just sort of philosophically have a difference of opinion of access to the courts in these particular situations. So I just want to start from the principle of this legislature, when it enacted this, made it very clear, and that language is still contained in this bill on line 49, that all damages, and that's where we start from. And when you take all damages, to me, that means all damages that are available. And there was no limitation, there was no designation of real property or not. The legislature intended it to be all damages. And at one of the previous committee stops, there was some conversation by proponents of the bill that this was going to lead to just an influx of people running to the courthouse. And the fact that this law stood for almost 40 years without a real interpretation of what all damages means and wasn't really challenged until 2019 indicates to me, as a litigator, as someone who represents the people, that tells me that this is not a case or an area of the law that is heavily litigated, where we need to have concerns that all of a sudden, you know, we're going to have these influx of cases. And if we have an influx of cases, we've got a bigger problem on our hands, because what we have is people who are doing the work of industries that involve really dangerous things and dangerous materials and hazardous chemicals and things that can, as we've seen, really impact our waterways. And to me, those types of businesses, if you engage in that, should have the highest level of scrutiny, and we should expect the highest performance from them. And, you know, what we are dealing with are individuals who are operating outside of the permit that cause damage. And what I think your bill does is actually reward people and incentivize people to operate outside of that, because the highest standard that we can hold them to is strict liability. So what we're saying is, you operate outside this permit, you do things that were not contemplated, or there is a result that was not contemplated, the highest level of standard that makes those injured parties have easier access or a not as complicated litigated case, we're rewarding that behavior by saying you can recover for personal property under strict liability, but not damages to you as a person. So I think to some extent we're also saying we value property, and I'm not saying that you do as an individual, but this bill values property over the lives of individuals. And when we talk about the Supreme Court case that came out in 2019, we're dealing with one of the most conservative courts that we've had that has said all, in my opinion, it's one of the most conservative courts we've had, but you know, we're saying all damages, and that they're in agreement with all damages. And the Aaron Brockovich case that got mentioned, I think it's such an easy example to highlight why strict liability in that situation would have made those families' lives a lot better. Because if you've watched the film, those families were threatened by people who are intentional polluters, by people who intentionally put chemicals into the water system and harmed children, and children died, and families died. And in that situation, they had to spend years and years and years litigating when what we should have.
Can you finish up here?
I'm getting there, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, years and years and years litigating against big corporations who intentionally harmed these people. And I think we go backwards by saying we're not going to hold you to the highest standard. And I think you should be able to sue for all damages, including personal injury, under a strict liability theory when you go outside the permit and cause harm. And so for those reasons, I will be down on the bill today.
Rep. Gottlieb, you're recognized.